Hello all and welcome to the final event in this week, Somewhere Over the Rainbow, Gender and Sexuality. It's great to see some of you here who've been at some of our other events and some new names as well. So far this week, we've discussed Sara Ahmed's Killjoy Manifesto and how if we're working in institutions or studying in institutions, it's important that we work on institutions. And we talked a bit about some of the joys in killing joy. We also had a great event on Wednesday talking about contemporary masculinities, including Jack Halberstam's work on female masculinities. Yesterday, I think I know some of you were at a really moving and powerful event on Black feminisms and the work of Audre Lorde. And yeah, if you missed any of these events, they'll eventually be up on the Inspiring Minds website. There's a section where recordings and blog posts will be put up shortly. So moving on to today's event, which I'm really excited about, we've got a creative workshop centering the lives, research and creative work of trans and non-binary people. It's a real honour to be joined today by Ezra and Lo. So Dr. Ezra Horbury completed their PhD at the University of Cambridge and is currently a British Academy postdoctoral research fellow in English at UCL. Their current research project aims to produce the first substantial study of paratext in early modern English Bibles, and they work more broadly on gender, sexuality, theology, and the supernatural in Renaissance literature. They've published widely on the Renaissance theology and queer and trans themes, and their first book, Prodigality in Early Modern Drama, was published with Boydell and Brewer in 2019. This year, they co-edited the creative collection Transcribed, an anthology of trans writing with Dr. Zain Yao, who some of you met, who coordinated the Matter of Black Lives Week last week. Lo Marshall is an urban geographer researching gender and sexuality. Lo's doctoral research combines participant photography, narrative writing and speaking, and in-depth semi-structured interviews to investigate how trans people's voices might productively complicate prevailing political, academic, and social understandings of gender. As a research fellow, Lo works on how LGBTQ+ migrant communities have created and experienced nighttime spaces in London. As part of ongoing collaborations researching LGBTQ+ nightlife in London with Prof. Campkin, Lo has co-authored an article in Soundings Journal and guest co-edited Urban Pamphleteer, and we'll hear from that this afternoon, evening. Lo also curated a queer salon at the Museum of London in 2018 and contributed to the exhibition Queer Spaces London from the 1980s to Today at the Whitechapel Gallery in London in 2019. So it's really exciting to have them with us. As you will have seen on the holding screen, interaction for this event will be through Slido. So if you go to www.slido.com and enter the code J768, you'll be able to submit your questions for the Q&A at the end through there. And we'll also prompt you to respond to some questions and create kind of word clouds together through that as part of the event. So I'm going to hand over, first of all, to Ezra. Thank you.
Hello. Let me share my screen. Okay, so I'm just going to start today with talking very basically about some of the issues of terminology that we face when talking about transgender issues. There are a lot of different terms, a lot of different vocabulary in this in trans studies and in how people identify. And this is a conversation that is evolving all the time. There is a lot of discussion, a lot of debate over which terms different people use. The aim of this event is to be as inclusionary as possible. So we're going to be as broad as possible about including various terms. I'm not going to be doing clear definitions of different bits of vocabulary here. So trans, a couple of very basic notes on gender and sex, how those are historically been defined. in previous discussions in previous decades, gender and sex were very loosely differentiated from one another by sex meaning regarding biology and gender meaning regarding social behavior. That differentiation has been vastly complicated in recent years, and we now understand sex as itself being socially constructed, that sex governs the socially determined categories for biological elements. So although sex may be governed by biology, the way that we categorize and interpret sex is not. That is entirely a social issue. Some of the terms here can be used in intersecting ways, some of them can't. And again, that depends entirely on individual people and how they identify. Non-binary, for example, some people who identify as non-binary, such as myself, also identify as transgender. Some people don't. Transgender itself very broadly can have lots of different meanings to different people. Again, it can refer to having a perceived disconnect between how society perceives you and your gender and how you experience your gender internally. It can refer to a specific discomfort with certain sex characteristics of your body. Some people who are trans pursue transition, which can range from social transition to medical transition. If you go by the dominant media's relationship with representation of transness, you may only know of it as trans people are people who have the surgery, which refers usually to what we call genital affirmation surgery. But there are actually a huge number of kinds of medical transition people can pursue. Not all trans people choose to pursue those. Many trans people can't pursue them for health reasons. Overall transness, I'd like to refer to one of Jack Halberstam's quotes, which I'm going to have to go to my notes for this. So Jack Halberstam defines transness as a term that puts pressure on all modes of gendered embodiment and refuses to choose between the identitarian and the contingent forms of trans identity. So this is a way of thinking of trans as a way of putting pressure on existing categories. And the word cisgender, which is something you might have come across and might not, is literally just means, cis means on the same side of, and trans means on the other side of. So a transgender person is someone who moves from one gender to another, and a cis person is one who stays on the same side as the gender that they were assigned at birth. The way that the world sees them, the way that they see themselves. And I'll just say briefly on the concept of being intersex, there is a lot of discussion at the moment as to how intersex as a category relates to transness. Intersex people are those who were born with some biological characteristic that doesn't clearly conform with one of the two binary categories of sex that we have in Western society. Some intersex people may pursue some degree of transition, some do not. Some identify as trans and some do not. These transness and intersexuality are often considered studied in relation to one another because a lot of the laws that govern trans people also relate to intersex people. And just finally a note on the difference between gender expression and gender identity. These are two things that people, that can be quite confusing to understand the difference between. Gender expression regards things like how you dress, how you behave, and gender identity is how you feel, how you identify. Gender identity and gender expression usually align, but not always. A woman could be very masculine. She could have very short hair and prefer suits to dresses, and maybe even could be read by most people in society as male. But if she identifies as female, then she is a woman. She is just a woman who prefers to present in a masculine manner. Likewise, a transgender man who is a man who is assigned female at birth but identifies as a man could, if he wanted, put on whatever stereotypical feminine accoutrements you want to think of, a dress and feminine categorized cosmetics. That doesn't make him less of a man. That is just a gender identity and a gender expression that aren't seen as traditionally in Concord, but there is no reason that those can't be combined. So I'd like to talk a little bit about my personal research. So I am an early modernist, and my main project at the moment is theological in scope, but I also work a lot on gender. Now, the early modern period is, I mostly work sort of on 1450 to 1650. And some of you might be thinking, well, you know, trans surely is quite a recent invention of the 20th century. How on earth do you apply that to a historical setting? And there are a couple of responses to this potential quandary. There are some historians who engage in what is called ancestralism, whereby they seek out individuals who lived in the past and who might have identified as transgender in the modern day, people who lived by a different name and a different gender, presented in that kind of way. That isn't the kind of research I do. The way that we understand sex and gender is hugely tied into late 19th century and early mid 20th century medical discourses. Hormones and chromosomes, for example, aren't something people knew about in Shakespeare's time. They had totally different ways of relating to gender. Some of the, here are some images from some of the texts and artistic pieces that I'm working with. Some of these are more recent illustrations. This one on the left, of course, is not an early modern illustration, but I'm primarily work with text, so it's the texts I'm working with rather than these images. The project that I'm currently working on is, to quote from my grant proposal, an interdisciplinary theoretical treatment of the transgender body in the literary imagination of early modern England. And I am trying to radically reassess how gender was constructed and represented in the early modern period in the light of transgender theory. So, rather than understanding gender and sex in this very modern way of being defined by chromosomes and hormones and very specific understanding of how sex development functions, I want to return to looking at this time period where sex and gender are constructed across many other different axes. They're constructed across axes of childhood and old age, body type, fatness, thinness, disease, race, disability. You'll see many representations of how boys are seen as a much similar gender to women than they are to adult men in the early modern period. You'll see if a woman behaves too much like a man, she will physically change to become more like a man and can, in some of the more fanciful texts, transform into one. Just as young boys are seen as analogous to women, old women are seen as more analogous to men. Old women are seen to grow beards, are seen to be threatening and disorderly. as a result of this. So what I'm trying to do with this project is to explore transhistorically some of the correlations between the way that gender is perceived today and how it's perceived back then. I'm really interested in this concept, bio-knowledge, which concerns how we develop a biomedical knowledge of the body and seek to control it as a result of that, and the kind of false assumptions that are made today about how the body works in a gendered context, and the false assumptions that were made in the early modern period, because you get lots of really weird coincidences, such as the idea that menstruation is this natural and necessary process that women must go through. This is something that comes up a lot in modern discourse on hormonal birth control, and in the early modern period as well, it was believed that women had to menstruate because they had too much blood, essentially, and other similarities, like how early modern women are believed, early modern women who are sexually promiscuous are seen as having this innate biological tendency to breed sexual disease, which I want to look at comparatively to modern attitudes about how HIV functions, or how HIV is seen to function in queer male communities. Now, aside from this kind of research, we've also done a few more modern focused things with UCL funding. In 2019, Zain Yao and I, in collaboration with Ella Metcalf, who works in MAPS, we won a grant from UCL's Grand Challenges scheme to put on the Trans Studies, Trans Lives conference, which brought trans researchers and trans creative figures all together to put on a big interdisciplinary conference and kind of resist a lot of the transphobia that was becoming so fraught at that time in UK academia. And from building on that research, we won an additional grant from UCL Culture's Beacon Bursary scheme to put together a series of writing workshops, from which we eventually produced this book, Transcribed, an anthology of trans writing. So I'm going to do a little reading from this in a minute. This book is published by Polari Print, which is one of the, I think of only two exclusively LGBTQ publishing houses in the UK, and it is founded and run by UCL students. Is a shot from their website, Polari Print, if you want to check them out. They publish all kinds of LGBTQ stuff and writing that particularly tries to give a voice to marginalized people, working class people, people who are often excluded from dominant spaces in publishing. And I'm going to read a couple of pieces from this book. The first piece of prose from C.N. Lester. C.N. is let me flip to their bio. C.N. Lester is the author of Trans Like Me, and they are the co-founder of the United Kingdom's first national queer youth organisation, and they curate the trans art event Transpose for Barbican. Their work has been featured on BBC Radio 3 and 4, SBS, The Guardian, ABC, The Independent, Newsnight, and at Sydney Opera House. So I'm going to read a piece of theirs that was published in this book. And I will call up, yeah, here are some of the images from the book. When I can't sleep, I find it comforting to plan aspects of the future in miniature. Not the kind of daytime planning necessary for all the large-scale parts of life, but the conjuring up of all kinds of small details that exist for me alone. It started when I was little, as a distraction from obsessional thoughts, and I think it grew and continued as a way of finding, and holding tight to the small joys of living, which are so necessary when life as a whole is hard. I like to imagine all of the meals that I'll make for my friends and the coffee cup I'll use only on Sunday mornings, otherwise insignificant aspects of travel. How different will the laundry detergent smell? Possible names for eventual dogs, the flowers I would plant if I had a garden, and the time to plant flowers. One of the best and most comforting plans is the perfect bookshop day. Any kind of day would work in any season, and it wouldn't begin in any rush. Wherever I would be starting from, in whichever city, I would walk to where I wanted to go, and my money would be saved up and set aside just for this purpose. No shopping lists for work, nothing for a literature review or to complete a bibliography, and no pressure to buy for colleagues or students. I would take my time and be curious and explore. There would be multiple bookshops and multiple pauses for coffee, iced in a park or hot in a packed and steamy cafe, and then more bookshops, and then a celebratory dinner with a glass of wine and all of my new purchases spread out on the table. There are two crucial elements necessary for this plan's success. The first is material, the money to do it with, a world safe enough to do it in, and the books themselves. The details I fantasize over the most are the physical, embossed and glossy covers, the differences of paperback size, the multiple textures of paper, and all the various scents of glue and ink. In my mind's eye, I weigh up different editions in my hands to choose the best fit and stroke the spines of the books on the shelves because their colours are so tempting. The second element is cultural, and I don't know when to experience it, when to expect to experience it, but I imagine it all the same. On the perfect bookshop day, I don't go looking for trans books or books by trans authors or books that understand and convey the complexity and interconnectivity of human nature as standard. I don't have to look, they're just there, not in one section of one bookshop, but spread out across them all in every genre. In the sci-fi and fantasy aisle of an enormous store, there'd be standalones and series casually representative of all our different ways of being, even as the authors challenge us to consider further modes of existence. On the display tables by the front doors, covered in new releases, bestsellers, and prize winners. Trans authors will be generously represented. I'll be both envious and excited to read them and buy more than I meant to in the 3-for-2 deals. Stopping in a specialist crime fiction shop, I'll pick up a mystery whose protagonist reminds me of myself in flattering and unflattering ways. By the end of the day, I'll be weighed down with gifts for friends, illustrated children's books, cookery books, enormous art folios. When I spread them all out to admire over dinner, I'll prop a new romance open next to my plate and read about someone with a body like mine, being loved by someone like the people I love and have loved. I am so greedy for these books that I can't tell how I will feel when I finally have them. Every daydreaming construction of that feeling emerges from this current lack, this wanting. I know what it's like to seek out authentic trans content and to treasure the works of trans authors, from the overwhelming fascination, dread, and magic of first adolescent glimpses through to the professional satisfaction of sharing a stage with fellow writers. But I don't know what it's like to have every kind of trans author and every kind of trans representation embedded into each and every aspect of our literary worlds. What it would be like to see the pronouns I use being used without comment throughout not just one novel, but many, to have a trans character introduced in a work by an unknown author and not experience the automatic and unconscious wincing trained into me by continual disappointment, to be defined not by the desire to see our trans lives honestly depicted, but by a fulfillment that long ago ceased to be remarkable. I support trans authors for many reasons, and some of those reasons are altruistic, but one of the strongest is this self-centered yearning. I want to be catered to, pandered to, Mary Sued. I want the serious position of the universal everyman and the schlock genre hero and villain. I want never to be surprised by the presence of a trans person on stage, whatever the category of said person or said page. I know there is part of me that wants this for noble reasons, but what I feel is the hungry, selfish reader who grew up with a book hidden under the classroom desk and stayed up all night reading and turns to books whenever life is difficult, and also when it isn't. I think that this hunger is a good thing. I also think that I'm far from alone in feeling it. and that the more of us who feel it and spread it and keep feeling it, then the shorter the time is until we can experience this daydream as an everyday reality. The most comforting part of all of these middle-of-the-night private plans is the belief that eventually they will come true. Nothing about them is outside of the bounds of possibility. They're only the small joys of living, advanced a little on from where they currently stand. I don't believe that this perfect day full of books is out of reach, only that to get there will take time and effort and community, three things which are not lacking, and which I know we are all of us working on and through in different ways. All of those factors and concerns and the continual planning around them are part of the work we do as trans writers, on our own and with each other, for ourselves and for each other. But I can feel myself running down, tired out as I write this, and my mind turning inwards from its daylight, large-scale focus to a smaller nighttime form of imagination. This is part also of what we do as writers and as readers. We can imagine for our own comfort and pleasure, and trust that the reality, when it will and must come, will be more than those imaginings prepared us for. So that was C.N. Lester's A Future Reader. Now, how are we doing schedule-wise? I'm going to very, very quickly read another poem by one of our contributors. It's a very short poem by Fred Turtle, which is titled With Adult-Sized Hands. My girl writes poems that have yet to hear of the invention of the radio, never held a small perfect hologram of Toby dancing in their palms or counted static across dome television screens. She writes original email subject lines, kneels as if in prayer. The typewriter sinks into a blanketed kitchen armchair throne. She remembers the year and almost stops breathing. Outside, there is a tree growing blue apples. Our neighbors watch from the garden wall. The future is always unprecedented. I lean my head all the way out, smelling burnt sugar, and reach towards the horizon. So this was a creative project we did to try and bring more of a platform to trans writers in the UK. And now we're going to do a writing exercise. How long do people have to complete this?
I think we'd said around 6 minutes. That sounds okay.
Okay. So I've got here a choice of 5 writing exercises that you can do. The first, write a poem inspired by the form of haiku. And you've probably all heard of haikus, but a haiku, just to be clear, is a poem that has 2 images split into 3 lines of 5 syllables, and it contains a seasonal reference. So I think there's a great thing to write. Now we're in the time of the leaves changing. The second task you could choose is to write a piece that incorporates the following words: crime, ecstatic, snowy, observed, pressure, forthright, historical, and owl. You could write a letter from one character to another. You can take one of these starting sentences and write a continuation of the story. Our starting sentences are: you could say it began with a phone call. Michael had watched them both for weeks. She remembered the way it was the first time she saw the prison. Midsummer, no time to be in New Orleans. With the dawn came the light. And finally, the last will and testament left them only a object generated by perchance.org/object. Continue this story. So if you go to perchance.org/object, you will get a random object for you to write about. So I think we're going to do this for 6 minutes. And I think I need to stop and then restart this to make this work properly. Okay, so I'm now going to hand over to Lo Marshall.
My video is just about to start. Hold on. Hello. Thank you so much, Ezra. That's great. I really enjoyed it. And thank you for doing the labour of talking through all of those terms. And so I'm not going to repeat you too much. And I'm mostly going to just chat about my own work, really. But I will sort of explain how I approach gender in my work and I suppose probably in life, really. I'm seeing some questions come in, which is great. I think we're going to save those to the end, but if you want to keep putting them in, then we can talk about them when we're through with the other bits and pieces. I'm just going to start my presentation. And if you've not already, feel free to keep throwing in your responses to the what is gender question on the Slido. Okay, so hopefully you can see my slides now. So the title of the presentation is the title of my PhD, basically, which I'll get to, but it really centers on looking at the lived experiences of trans and non-binary people in relation to different kinds of spaces. And the way that I approach gender in this work, I borrow this kind of definition from Petra Doan on the slide, which is that gender is not a dichotomy, but a splendid array of diverse experiences and performances. And what I really like about this is that it just holds possibilities that are really expansive for a kind of what gender is and can be, not as a binary or a kind of linear spectrum, but as a kind of constellation of different potential. It also kind of avoids a specifically Western-centric framing of gender and specifically contemporary ways of knowing and doing gender as well. So I think that's part of the usefulness of this kind of expansive approach. And so when I speak about gender or I speak about gender diversity, this is really kind of what I'm thinking about here. And also, I'm not going to cover cis and non-binary again, but I borrow my definition of trans, or my way of thinking about trans, from Susan Stryker, who is a really foundational figure in transgender studies and an incredible scholar. And in her book, Trans Histories, she describes trans as the movement across a socially imposed boundary from an unchosen starting place. And what I think is particularly useful with this is it brings in the idea of consent, the idea of being assigned a sex and a whole load of gendered baggage that comes with it at birth that is not chosen, and a movement away from that, but without a defined definition, a kind of a defined destination. So there's open to different destinations, but also change and process in how we relate to our gender. And as Ezra touched upon, the word trans, as we use it now in relation to sex and gender, is quite a lot more expansive generally than its origins from sort of late 19th and early 20th century medical and psychoanalytic knowledge and practices. And it's through this kind of medical knowledge that the kind of category of the transsexual and the kind of pathologized disorder of transsexualism emerged. Particularly this slide is from the work of Magnus Hirschfeld, who is a Berlin-based sexologist, and who's also known to be one of the kind of early advocates for gay and trans rights, as we would call them now. So he was quite progressive in his work in many ways. And of course, the legacies of these discourses of transsexualism and transsexual as a kind of social, but also a kind of pathologized medical category, continue to affect the lives of trans people today, whether or not that you medically transition. So transgender emerged and became more popularized in the 90s through trans activism as a non-pathological descriptor, kind of a descriptor of experience, but also for some people an identity category as well. And the intention with transgender rather than transsexual was to allow greater space and flexibility for gender diversity within this kind of umbrella category of transgender. And in that way to kind of better reflect natural human variation and gender diversity. So what really emerges and still remains a question is, are these questions of knowledge, I suppose? Like who's the expert on gender? Is it medical professionals? Is it the people who legislate for equalities legislation or for gender recognition, which currently to have a gender recognition certificate in the UK requires proving your gender to a panel of legal, medical and psychiatric experts who then decide whether your gender is authentic enough or not to then be able to legally change your gender and get your birth certificate renewed, basically. And so this question really underpins my work. It's not just a question of knowledge and a question of power and expertise. It's really an ethical question in that. So my work is very much underpinned by the approach that people know themselves best and are they experts on their own gender. And so then how do we put this to work in our research as students and scholars? And sometimes that's a bit of a challenge, I will say, but also an opportunity for creativity as well. So in part of my work, I've been working since 2016 with Professor Ben Campkin, based at the UCL Urban Lab and the Bartlett School of Architecture. And together we've been researching LGBTQ nightlife in London. And part of our early work on this involved a survey with members of LGBTQ communities in London. But how do you collect demographic information when you have these kind of commitments that are based or sort of informed by queer thinking and by trans studies and trans people to not force people into particular identity boxes? So we recognise that identity categories can and do operate as sites of knowledge, power and exclusion, and can feel restrictive, therefore, for a number of reasons. So we don't want to force identifications, but we also know that identifying with particular categories or labels can be really affirming practice of positioning yourself in the social world and making sense of your own identity. And the ability to do this can be particularly meaningful, especially if you've been denied this. So our approach to this was to, instead of having gendered boxes or for sexuality, gender, ethnicity, and so on, we left an open box and invited people to respond with their gender. And so this is what, if taken verbatim, this was what came back. So I think it's about just over 35, taken verbatim, 35 different expressions of gender when we map it this way. And this is from 227 respondents. So what this does, this kind of approach, is a statistician's nightmare, but actually I think it shows what a beautiful mess gender is and can be. This approach allows space for specificity. So a number of people mark themselves as cis, which has historically been an unmarked category. And that actually shows kind of recent shifts within LGBTQ communities towards thinking more carefully about gender and their position within the gendered world. It also allows for ambiguity. So some people have said, like, mostly male, gender fluid / gender queer is all one answer. It allows for somewhat unexpected. Some people have kind of brought together two categories, so queer femme as a kind of category which speaks to both gender and sexuality, for example, and also just the rejection of gender entirely, so human. And I think that's fine, and it's important to make space for that. So in my work, I am interested in ways that gender norms operate in these worlds of knowledge of ideas, as kind of abstract categories in relation to social attitudes, public policy and science, all of these different kinds of knowledge. But I'm particularly interested at looking at the ways that we do gender in these every ways. How does gender texture our everyday experiences? How are norms reproduced and challenged through embodiment, through spatial practices, through social interactions, but also the materiality of our social worlds. A really obvious, I always end up talking about toilets, but it's a really important one, right? Like, if we can't use toilets outside of our homes, then actually we have limited or uncomfortable access to public life, right? So it's actually about, public toilets are about participation in public life. And so this is a really obvious example. This is taken in the City of London, and you can see the emblem there. And you see here the way that binary gender is inscribed in the material form of central London. But importantly, in thinking about this, it's not just that gender is, the realities of gender are reflected. It's not passively reflected in the materiality of this space, but actually what this space is doing is actively reproducing and disciplining binary gender norms in ways that disadvantage those who cannot easily fit the gendered expectations that exist within these spaces. There's also less obvious ways that gender kind of textures our experiences of everyday life. And this is just a picture here of like relatively indistinct bodies in Dalston. And something that's very clear to me. Oh, just one more thing actually that I would say here, if you look on the right of the screen, there are two signs from the toilets, and actually I just wanted to highlight the way that these are quite common signs that you will see marking toilets, but they're quite clearly racialized, classed, as well as being gendered, and gesturing to particular kind of ideal forms of sexuality and they're non-disabled people. So actually there's a whole bunch of kind of social norms at play in this signage that gets used to label toilets. So back to the kind of the street, our kind of experiences moving down the street. Something that for me as a queer non-binary person, that's how I would identify myself, but most of the time I'm read as a cis woman, and usually as a lesbian. I've got enough kind of queer signifiers for most people to be able to read that, in terms of got short hair, facial piercings, tattoos that you probably can't see. And you know, I'm partial to a button-up shirt and a dykey boot. But if I kiss my partner in public, then I receive different kinds of attention. If I hold her hand, we'll almost always attract some kind of stares, if not a shout, unless we're in a particular LGBTQ space, for example. And this speaks to the importance of different kinds of contexts and how that shapes the social interactions that we will have, and the way that gender and sexuality is disciplined within those spaces. On this stretch of road that you can see here, I've experienced harassment from a man, the same man, within a couple of minutes, once with him assuming that I was straight. I had longer hair at the time. And then as he walked back, homophobic abuse because he realised that I was with my partner. And if we look to scholars like Judith Butler, we see how this kind of spectrum of violent practices, various homophobic and transphobic practices that are enacted towards queer and trans people, emerge from a desire to maintain sexual and gender norms and punish their transgression. And of course, these kinds of street level experience of harassment will likely be familiar to many women, people of colour, disabled people and people of faith. And of course, these aren't mutually exclusive categories. And so I invite you to reflect on these as well. And so I'm just going to talk briefly about my work. So my work is informed by the kind of critique of knowledge and the approach to people being experts on their own gender. This informs not only how I kind of intellectually and theoretically approach my work, but also what my research practice is. My research is with participants. I collaborate with participants. I do not do research on research subjects. And we co-produce knowledge together. And participants, through these kind of this co-production, they shape the ways that the research unfolds. And one of the this is my PhD research. This is a prompt from here where I've asked people to respond to the research theme, creating spaces of belonging. And my research process is very much, I see it as a call and response, where I set a theme and invite them to do a task, and they respond back with images, captions, and narratives. And then that goes on to structure interviews that we'll have. So the participants are sort of setting the agenda for their own interviews, but within the parameters that I've set to maintain focus, which is for the benefit of everybody, really. I think the way that I engage with the images and writing, particularly the visual material, I suppose I draw from social science visual methods, which is very much using kind of participant photography as a way, as a method, as a way of eliciting material that we then speak about. But I also read the images and interpret the images, which is more of a kind of visual cultures approach. And so I'm just going to kind of quickly look at some of the ones that come through from the theme belonging. And so a lot of these are kind of really vernacular photography. So selfies, a lot of them, or some of them taken from, I think probably from Google. And in relation to belonging, what it really does is speak to the whole range of ways that people experience and think about belonging, from belonging in the body, belonging in the home, belonging in the gym, but also kind of national belonging. The image of housing on the top is a housing estate from Tbilisi in Georgia, which one of the participants referenced as a space of belonging for them as a West Asian Georgian person. The selfie that you can see with the caption on it is from a local nightclub, and she's specifically locating herself within that space, and that's an important aspect of the picture. It's not an image of a sign, she's locating herself within that space. Similarly, if I was going to read the image on the top left, this is a picture of a woman who is house sitting and for the first time felt free and able to embody her gender and express her femininity most of the time while she was there. And in this image, she's not just kind of lighting herself in the garden. You can see the way that the light is shining is very much illuminating her femininity, or the feminine coded aspects of her gender expression there. I would say that another part of the ethics of this approach, just before reading a couple of bits, is that a lot of the time trans people, and something that I experienced from participants when we'd first meet, I'd get an ask me anything. And whilst I appreciate the generosity of that intention, I think it comes also from a place of trans people always being pushed to lay themselves bare and vulnerable in a particular way to kind of prove their humanity, and that they're unthreatening to people. So actually an important aspect of this method and the creativity of this method has been enabling, moving away from this kind of approach and ensuring that the power balance is kind of more even than it often can be. I'm going to read a couple of extracts from the Urban Pamphleteer, which is produced through the UCL Urban Lab, and the series editors are Ben Campkin, who I work with, and also Rebecca Ross from Central St Martin's. And each issue is on a different theme, and I co-edited with them this issue on LGBTQ nightlife. And just to give a content note, I'm going to start with a poem by Travis Alabanza, which includes some homophobic slurs. So this is Death Drop by Travis. And just to give you, if you don't know who Travis is, they are an award-winning performer, writer and theatre maker. And their debut poetry book, Before I Step Outside, You Love Me, has been shipped to over 19 countries worldwide and listed within the top transliterary books of 2017. And actually this poetry collection was all written around, or oriented around their experiences in public space, and particularly on harassment in public transport. So this is Death Drop. This is for all those who occupy the space between the fabulous and fear, between fierceness and ferocious, between the finger snap and a punch, between the death drop and death, between the fierce and the faggot, between the faggot and the fag. I wonder if the same people who harass us in the street are the same ones asking us for lipstick in the club. The same people who go to the drag race viewing party only to ignore us in danger the next morning. The same guy that danced in the bar with me last Monday will inevitably kick me out the bathroom on Tuesday. When they say, yes, God, are they praying for us to be forgiven for the abuse they threw? How does jealousy manifest on the dance floor? This is for all those who keep the party going, but are never asked how they're getting home. For those that navigate a body in limbo between the death and the drop, to be the life of the party, but always still left behind, to be in everyone's photos, but in no one's thoughts. I wonder who gets to death drop without the fear of dropping dead. Will you pay for my Uber ride home, my friend? Or did you not realise I could talk? And I just briefly will also read an extract from Victoria Sin's contribution to the same issue. And you can access this online, by the way, at the Urban Pamphlet website. So femphobia, misogyny, and racism are huge problems in the gay community, as evidenced in the common Grindr byline, no fats, no femmes, no Asians. In the underrepresentation of drag queens of colour, in the erasure or invalidation of the queer identity of feminine presenting cis-passing women, in mask for mask gay culture, in the fact that many gay men won't date male drag queens. Femininity doesn't belong to women, and it doesn't belong to men either. As a drag queen, I'm not pretending to be a woman. I'm intentionally performing femininity as presented and constructed by Western mainstream media and iconography. These are images and attitudes that have been ingrained through social conditioning, which I've been unwittingly measured against, and which have been policed on my body throughout my life. So I refuse to entertain a discourse about whether women should be allowed to engage with these gender constructs as drag. I believe that anyone who is a drag queen and performs femininity or their idea of womanhood should be aware of how many people are systematically oppressed based on the gender constructs they perform in drag. Drag's humour should be at the expense of gender, not women. It's important that drag does not punch down. So I'll leave that there. And one thing that we also were going to say was we thought on the Slido maybe another question we could think about responding to, and that I'd be really interested in your answers for, are what the spaces, what your spaces of belonging are. Let me see. And maybe we could at some point have a look at I'm interested to see how the gender word cloud's going.
Yeah, maybe we've got some, thanks so much, Lo. We've got some responses in for both of those. Can you see them, or shall I screen share them?
Oh yeah, maybe screen share them, that'd be nice.
Okay, let's see. make sure I didn't share the wrong thing. Hang on a minute. Oh, here we go. Can you see that cloud, the what is gender?
Yeah. Great.
Ezra, do you want to come on as well? Because we could maybe just discuss this together.
I like the idea of gender as recycling.
I like splendid. I've just been watching the Haunting of Bly Manor, which is constantly repeating the phrase "perfectly splendid."
I think there are some. Oh, that's the other poll.
Yeah, great.
Yes, I think we have some interesting tensions there between gender as expression, gender as a practice, gender as a way of existing. These very different ways people understand gender as something you do, something you are.
Yeah, I think it's, I was speaking to another friend who is a trans person doing trans research, and we were talking about theory and gender, but just our own relationships to gender. And he was saying, you know, like the closer I get to it, the more I look at it, the more it like dissolves under my touch, you know. The more impossible it is
Quantum.
to try and understand or describe. And I think this kind of cluster of words also speaks to that. I like joy and pain. I think I saw somewhere, and I've not looked at the comments and questions for a little bit, but someone mentioned burgers, and I know in that Travis makes a joke about gender as violence, right? And I think that's also kind of an interesting way of thinking about it that also fits with the idea of consent that Susan Stryker touches upon.
Yeah. Do you want to look at the other one?
Yeah.
This is, I mean, this is really provocative. I feel like we could talk about this for ages. Oh.
Yeah, I think anonymous streets is interesting, isn't it? I think in my work, well, as a kind of gender wonky queer person, I think there's a comfort in anonymity. And I know that in my work, one of the spaces of belonging that someone talked about in another piece of like the work that sort of preceded this, they were talking about going to galleries as a kind of space, like a comforting space, because they could have privacy in public, you know, they could kind of be invisible, and their home wasn't an easy space for them at that time because of their relationships with their family. And yeah, you know, speaking to that, my room is kind of an interesting one as well, isn't it? Because it's about the home, but it's also separating out the home, you know. The home isn't this kind of singular entity. You can have a room which is kind of a space of recuperation where you can anchor your own identity and be yourself, but you might find that actually gender and sexuality is kind of disciplined elsewhere in that home if you've got a homophobic or a transphobic family, or just a family or roommates that don't see you in your fullness, you know. I think that's something that definitely emerges in my work, my PhD work, where I do think about home quite a lot.
There were some of the sorry, Ezra.
I said different conceptions of space, you know, physical spaces, of course, and then social space, queer-led parties, where the space is created as part of it's a time-sensitive event. It's defined by the people who are present. Online communities, which raises all kinds of, I could talk for so long about the history of queerness and transness on internet communities and how that's changed and how it can feel, on the one hand, like so much of an escape from maybe physical spaces that aren't supportive for you, but you're also then at the whims of private companies. You can have your gender regulated in other ways. I recall Tumblr's decision to ban images of female presenting nipples when they introduced their new regulations.
Go on, Lo, no, go on.
I was going to say, in my work, it's been really common, excuse me, that trans people encountered the possibility of who they are online. So places like Tumblr or different message boards, or kind of the internet was a space where they kind of saw themselves, or the possibility of being themselves for the first time. So as a and actually that speaks for not just younger trans people, but trans people who would be now in their kind of 50s.
That generate. Sorry to interrupt. That I think there was a question from someone about this shift in generations. So as we're sort of discussing that and how online communities, the role that they've played, it might be a good point to just come in with some of these, because there's some really, can you see them? There's some really interesting questions that have come in.
Yeah.
One of them, just to tie in with what you were just saying about the people in their 60s, 70s, and then thinking about the more younger people, I suppose. Someone was talking about burgers and saying they were struck by different generations' responses to when Alabanza asked, I've seen burgers as well, when Alabanza asked the audience to throw something at them as a sort of gesture of solidarity or reclaiming violence. Do you think there have been shifts in this sense? So I guess, yeah, different generations' responses to violence.
I think I've noticed differences in generations' relationship to words. And I like Burgers is an amazing piece of work. If anyone hasn't seen it, and I don't know that Travis will tour it again, or who knows when theatre will be taking place again, but it's just it's a phenomenal, and I'd certainly recommend it. The word queer is one that people have like quite different generational relationships to. So older people, older gay men particularly, I've had conversations with, that they find it difficult, that it's become so widely used as a term and they can't kind of remove it from its context as a slur. But then, you know, at the same time, queer wasn't really a slur that was thrown around when I was young, but gay was the word for anything negative. So actually there are different like linguistic shifts. I really like queer. I understand myself as queer and strongly resonate with that as a kind of politics and a sort of non-identity identity, I suppose. It's interesting, the willingness for violence in that's a really interesting moment in the play, isn't it, where they ask a person to essentially like throw something at them in public when they've spent most of the play kind of talking about it and kind of working through it in this really interesting way. The play is like the kind of origin point for Burgers is an experience Travis had where a stranger threw a burger at them in the middle of the day on Waterloo Bridge. So that's kind of the significance of the throwing. And I can't say what I'd do in that situation. Like, yeah.
Well, when I saw I'll let Ezra speak. When I saw it, because I guess the ending is different for those of you who haven't seen it. The ending, I guess, is sort of different everywhere because it depends on, because it's Travis is addressing the audience, so it depends what the audience does. And I had when I went to see it in Cambridge, there was a very young person got up on stage and stood in front and blocked and like sort of stood in front of Travis and kind of blocked anything from happening to them. And I guess it possibly similar to this person's experience. And then an older trans woman came and was like, I've had loads of stuff thrown on me. Yeah, I'll do it if you want. Do you want it? And Travis was saying, yes. Yeah, it was this moment of, as you said, mentioned consent before. But I wonder how it's played out in different places.
Yeah, I'd love to hear them like reflect on that and the different kind of scenarios that have unfolded. I actually can't remember what happened when I saw it. I think someone took a really long time and then very feebly and gently did, after much like pushing from and kind of negotiation, they did throw something in, you know, like a really yeah, I don't know, I think there is a power in reclamation that I find personally. It's a really personal thing, isn't it? But I find there to be a power in reclaiming things and also working through violences that have been enacted upon us. And I suppose what that is doing then is it is messing with the power dynamic, isn't it? By you know, you're owning it, but that can also be something that's incredibly painful to do as a personal experience.
I think for people who are new to queer theory or LGBTQ plus spaces, they come to these spaces with, you know, as we all do, with a certain degree of trauma from living in a cis heteronormative society that you know, sees you as disgusting, as other, and has built up this vocabulary to demonize you, to other you, to pathologize you, and it becomes a reflex to contextualize any slurs, any reclaimed slurs within that context of broader society. And I think there is such a push to have this egalitarian discourse vocabulary that's shared by everyone, so that we're all using the correct language, and that correct language is and its use is a marker of our awareness that we should, that we respect each other, that you know, that it's a marker of safety. And it's very difficult when dealing with people who come from such different generations or different contexts in which those words mean different things. And you know, someone from one context whose experiences something always as a slur, or say, oh no, you can't use that word, that's the word that does violence, and to someone else it means something different. And those are conversations that remain, I think, very difficult to have. And I think on the subject of reclaiming violence, it reminds me a lot of the debates that were being had in like 70s, 80s, 90s, lesbian alternative sexuality circles about like BDSM and things, the like reenacting of or reclaiming of identities and acts that were seen that would be harmful or traumatic in, you know, the real world. And is it necessarily, is it a reproduction of trauma, or is it a parody of trauma to play with those in a sexual setting, in a theatrical setting, in fiction, etc. I think these are, yeah, these are debates that are coming back and getting really fraught these days about, you know, when as queer people we repeat or depict certain traumatic things. Does that, you know, is that therapeutic? Is it cathartic? Is it reclamatory? Or is it coercive in some degree of oppression? I'd like to think the former, but you know, it's a complicated subject.
Yeah, and maybe can be all of those things as well, isn't it? Which makes it kind of knotty and difficult to unpick.
Mm-hmm. I guess that connects with this other question, Ezra, that someone's asked during your presentation about how the experience of putting the book transcribed together was, because the kind of intergenerational process. Did any of these issues come up?
I don't think those are specific issues. Intergenerationally, we had two people, two trans women from a much older generation, and I think everyone else was in about the range of 18 to early 30s. Yeah, there weren't really any direct conflicts, anybody telling anyone that they were using the incorrect terminology or anything like that. But we did make sure to enforce quite friendly but strict rules about using respectful terminology, being careful about what kind of comments or jokes you made. I do recall one instance now where someone was trying to make a satirical joke in a way that was very sort of younger generation online humor that we sort of had to politely curb, because that is something that can be interpreted very differently outside of that particular space. But overall, it was a very affirmative and mutually respectful space.
I guess that ties in partly with someone asked during your presentation, Lo, but it doesn't say who the question is directed to. How do you find being at UCL, being non-binary?
I'm just actually looking for, I did a piece of writing as part of something with the Bartlett, that if anyone's interested. If I post it, where should I post it for people to access? Can I post it in the chat?
You can, as long as you select for panelists and attendees.
So this is what I've just posted as part of a really brilliant collaboration that's come from the Equality, Diversity and Inclusion budget, actually, from the Bartlett School of Architecture. And it's a lot of people responding to kind of oppression in institutions and higher education. And I've just posted my response. Around being, and I'm partly reflecting on being a non-binary person, not only at the university, but the sort of some of the ways that even in like equality, diversity and inclusion settings, that I kind of experience different kinds of challenges and erasures. In general, I find my experiences really positive. Like there's a brilliant community of, you know, that I've kind of found my people, I suppose, of queer scholars and trans scholars. And I have found my colleagues in my departments to be respectful. I've changed my name while I've been here, and everyone has been really great about it. The admin fairies in the geography department changed my name on my pigeonhole and on my desk and everything without me having to chase it up and follow them, you know, and follow that. So that was, you know, something that I really appreciated. But I'm also really aware that that is one person who I think is a queer person, being on it and recognizing that might not be everybody's experience, you know. So, but then also, you know, you go, you know, within the union, there's some quite gender critical voices, and so that can be present as difficulties.
It's an interesting and a difficult question to answer, because one has to think in answering about as, you know, as a faculty member, how open can one be about one's experience of potentially problematic behaviour. I have many colleagues who have been absolutely wonderful, incredibly respectful. People I've worked with, especially at UCL Culture, have been just outstanding. But also, one of the very first things I saw when I came to UCL, which was at Senate House Library, so not specifically, you know, owned by UCL, but obviously we, you know, Senate House is a place that we do a lot of stuff at. They had a display up of Sheila Jeffrey's work, who is incredibly transphobic and, you know, among other things, believes that Tony Blair passed the Gender Recognition Act to eradicate homosexuality. So, you know, she's off on her own little planet, and that was really quite an unpleasant thing to, you know, move to a new town, new job, and that be sort of the very first encounters you have with any kind of transness. I co-wrote an article with Zine for Transgender Studies Quarterly, which is, I think, coming out in the next issue, which talks a bit about the state of transphobia in UK academia. I think that there are broadly quite a lot of problems, and UCL certainly is not without those problems, I say very delicately. Yes, I would I especially like to thank my students, have always been absolutely wonderful. I think the young people are the future, and it's really great to see that there's been such a positive response from them, just absolutely universally.
Yeah, likewise with my students, not had an issue at all.
That's great to hear about the generations to come. Just that we've not got much long, but there are a couple of really interesting questions that maybe we could just touch on briefly. One, Lo, came in during your presentation about whether it's possible to do genuinely collaborative research with participants and how you deal with any issues of power imbalances.
Yeah, so I mean, I think you can do genuinely, I mean, there's always power, there's no such thing as objectivity, and so I'm very conscious of just maintaining critical subjectivity and an awareness of those power relations, and that does go through my research design, but also the analysis. So part of the reason for having these kind of staggered research, so that I'm asking people to submit their narratives and their images so that we discuss it in the interview, is so that I can say, this is my reading of what you've given me. So that, is that fair? How would you respond to that? And so actually I'm not just taking material and taking it away and analysing it, although I'm partly doing that, but I'm always very conscious of what the intention behind the contribution is and doing justice to that intention. But also I'm checking in with participants around my analysis. So there's always going to be power. Yeah, and I would say that I kind of think about ethics to quite an exhausting extent that's kind of necessary when we're working collaboratively with participants who we care about. Yeah.
Thank you. A question that came in during Ezra's presentation was about whether you think there's a particularly trans aesthetic in writing in the way that critics have written of écriture féminine, and whether you think that's an essentializing perspective.
So I would personally shy away from identifying any kind of totalizing trans aesthetic. I do think that would be likely essentializing, although I do think it sounds like a really interesting research question if someone's planning to do a research essay on sort of reading the écriture féminine through trans writing. But there are certainly trends in trans writing. And historically, across the 20th century, the trans memoir was almost the only type of writing that trans writing was represented in, which refers to a series of memoirs, I think, almost exclusively or entirely by trans women, which gained commercial success because they were seen as taboo, as transgressive, as a bit sexy, and certainly some of those memoirs deliberately played into that, like Haiti Joestar's "I Changed My Sex!" to give it its full title. And there's a need to maybe play into that kind of sensationalism if that's the way you need to make money and survive. So that was, a very particular important trend. For me personally, a trend that has developed among younger millennials and Zoomers is this kind of absurdist writing, this like postmodern neo-Dadaist trans writing, which is deliberately refusing to engage with cis heteronormativity in a very deliberately absurd way. Like, we live in a culture that's so gendered that my nephew has only just started to learn that not all cats are female and not all dogs are male. This is like that's the kind of culture we're steeped in. There's a poem I really like by Joshua Jennifer Espinoza. I'll just read the first couple of lines about this that engages in this kind of absurdism. So it's called "The Moon is Trans," and opens, "The moon is trans. From this moment forward, the moon is trans. You don't get to write about the moon anymore unless you respect that. You don't get to talk to the moon anymore unless you use her correct pronouns. You don't get to send men to the moon anymore unless their job is to bow down before her and apologize for the sins of the earth. I really enjoy that kind of we refuse to engage with the way you gender the world, of course, to observism.
Thanks so much. That was some great lines to end on there, Ezra. Thank you just so much for being with us for this event, and I also should, there's lots of people behind the scenes. I really want to thank Jess Thomas has been here for so many of the events this week. Today Anne-Marie's been helping out. Alex has been doing an amazing job on the Slido. So yeah, just I'm really glad that we were able to hold this event today. Just in terms of your writing that you did with the prompt that Ezra put up, and the photo prompt that you were sent in advance of the event, if you want to send in any submissions, we'll email you afterwards with places that you can do that, either anonymously or with your name or a pseudonym, whatever you want to do, to go up on the Inspiring Minds website. We'll share the word clouds. I think they were really they were quite amazing to see, so we'll definitely be putting those up. And yeah, just remains to be said that, you know, this festival 6-week bonanza carries on next week. We're moving on to climate emergency, and as we've had this week with the connections with the matter of Black Lives that Zion organised last week, I think in climate emergency we'll continue to discuss issues of race, definitely, but also gendered approaches to our environment. So just, yeah, thank you. We're going to leave the Slido open for a bit, so you can send any further comments or responses through there, and yeah, have a great weekend. Thank you all.
Thank you. Bye.